The faint sound of the latch catching stayed with me far longer than the actual admission of my actions. People frequently assume that revealing a secret brings an immediate sense of unburdening, offering a clean slate and a path toward forgiveness and restoration. I held that exact conviction as I sat upon a wooden seat inside the bishop's study. With my hands resting quietly together, the steady pacing of the wall clock filled the silence of a room that smelled gently of age and dust. I came with the sole intention of exposing the reality of my choices, convinced that transparency would serve as my shield. Instead, that specific afternoon marked the beginning of losing nearly everything that gave my life meaning. The true difficulty did not lie in uttering the confession itself, but rather in witnessing the aftermath that followed the spoken words. I grew up inside this world, raised in an Old Order Amish home where compliance was instilled as naturally as learning to walk. It was the only reality I knew, a heritage shared by my parents and nearly everyone around me, all of us adhering to the identical regulations, gathered for the same worship, and measuring our lives by the very same standards. My commitment to these teachings ran deep. I was out milking the herd before the sun broke the horizon, clothed in the traditional plain attire, and instructed to be guarded with my speech. Deference to leadership was never framed as a mere choice, but as the very definition of faithfulness. When reflecting on why I now share this journey, the motivation is straightforward. These are the benches I occupied, the boundaries I respected, and the hidden weights I carried. What unfolded after I opened up taught me a lesson about the nature of quiet isolation that remains permanently etched in my mind, and it may change the way you perceive these dynamics as well. Daily life within these settlements is dictated by the Ordnung. Far from a single piece of written legislation, this consists of a collective understanding of conduct and protocols maintained by the congregation, meaning the specific details can vary from one district to the next. That variation was something I failed to grasp in my youth. The bishop wields immense sway, overseeing both the spiritual direction and the corrective measures of the flock. Growing up, I carried the belief that bishops possessed a unique ability to spot spiritual vulnerability before anyone else could. Compliance was viewed as a form of security, and members were expected to yield to institutional oversight and embrace correction when it was deemed necessary. It was simply the standard way of existence. In this environment, bringing forward a wrongdoing plays a vital role. When an individual breaches a core standard, revealing the infraction to the leadership is expected. The intent is rooted in bringing the person back into proper alignment with the church, or at least that was the understanding I held. Yet, the absence of speech often communicates its own message, and children learn early on which matters can be openly discussed and which must remain unsaid. I internalized that boundary long before I reached maturity. The communal fabric is tightly woven, with families praying, working, and depending entirely on one another. While that proximity offers immense comfort, it also means a mistake becomes an inescapable shadow. Everyone is visible to everyone else, a reality that exerted a constant, unspoken pressure. By the time I reached 19, I understood that an admission of guilt was never restricted to a private matter between a soul and the Creator. It carried the power to reshape your family's standing, your prospects, and your very survival within the group. The shift began during the late autumn of my 19th year, just as the harvest concluded and the morning air took on the biting chill of approaching winter. I had spent months harboring a secret that, by the standards of our community, was deeply troubling. It involved nothing unlawful or harmful, yet it carried enough weight to make me dread the fallout. I had formed a bond with a young man from a separate district during a time frame when I had been instructed to sever all ties. We continued to cross paths in secret, catching moments after social gatherings or exchanging words through the help of trusted peers. Initially, I persuaded myself that the matter would remain undetected, but then the anxiety of waiting took hold. Every Sunday service began to feel heavy, and every interaction felt risky as I began monitoring the smallest details: who watched me a moment too long, who fell silent when I walked by, or who seemed to possess hidden knowledge. The burden followed me everywhere. When my father noticed my distress one evening and inquired about it, my denial came far too rapidly. The look of genuine care rather than suspicion on his face only amplified my internal ache. After weeks of sleeplessness and mentally rehearsing the worst-case scenarios, I decided that facing the leadership would be preferable to enduring the constant dread. Believing that openness would finally grant me tranquility, a meeting with the bishop was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. The weather that day remains vivid in my mind. Overcast skies, a piercing wind, and dry leaves scraping along the dirt. I arrived ahead of time, my hands stiff with cold despite wearing gloves. The bishop received me with courtesy, showing no signs of anger, which gave me a flicker of optimism. We sat together in a silence that stretched out until he finally inquired about the purpose of my visit. Fixing my eyes on the floor, acutely aware of the sound of my own breath, I finally stated that I needed to bring the truth to light. Once the words left my mouth, the secret seemed smaller. I detailed everything: the secret rendezvous, the private communication, our commitments to one another, and the anxiety that had consumed me. He observed quietly, interjecting only a few questions over the course of an hour. Stepping back outside, I felt a physical lightness, convinced the storm had passed. That sense of relief lasted for 3 days before a shift occurred. The way people engaged with me began to alter. It was subtle at first: shorter exchanges, fewer invitations, and childhood friends avoiding being left alone with me. But it soon became undeniable. Within weeks, the ministry began organizing formal disciplinary steps, as the core of my admission had spread through the congregation. The vulnerability I had surrendered was no longer my own. It was now community property. The connection with the young man dissolved shortly after under the weight of pressure placed on both of our families. While my parents never withdrew their affection, they were visibly torn between their devotion to their child and their obligations to the church. The true realization hit me months later, not during a sermon or an official gathering, but in a quiet moment when I looked ahead and realized I no longer recognized my own future. My entire existence was predicated on belonging, and that foundation was eroding. The definitive moment arrived on a freezing Sunday evening after the dismissal of church. As people gathered outside in clusters, I walked toward a group of longtime friends who offered nothing more than polite nods before the conversation abruptly ended. There was no confrontation or anger, only an immediate cold barrier. Standing there against the wind, a wave of physical nausea overtook me, and I stopped wondering how to fix my standing. Instead, I questioned if a place even existed for me anymore, and the reality was clear before I could even formulate the thought. What vanished that afternoon was not merely my social acceptance, but my faith that honesty automatically protects the one who speaks it. Looking back at those events now, I do not view the individuals involved as cruel. The majority were simply acting on what they genuinely believed to be right, a distinction that matters. The structure provided those around me with genuine meaning, identity, and security, and I recognize why those elements are deeply prized. Yet, I also recognize the immense toll exacted when compliance and acceptance are fundamentally fused together. Both of these realities exist simultaneously. I hold no malice toward individuals, nor do I view every district as identical, for my path was uniquely my own. However, institutional structures dictate human conduct, and well-meaning people can easily perpetuate painful traditions without ever intending to cause distress. Arriving at that understanding required years of reflection. Today, I balance a sense of appreciation with a sense of loss, carrying memories of genuine kindness alongside the memories of intense pressure, faith, and institutional silence. The catalyst that redirected my life was not the infraction I exposed, but the discovery of what honesty costs when your entire sense of belonging hangs in the balance. Before this reflection ends, I want to leave you with a thought to consider. Have you ever stepped forward with an important truth, only to find the ultimate outcome looked nothing like what you anticipated? If these reflections resonated with you, please consider sharing this story with someone else, connecting with this space, and sharing your own experiences below. Hearing those accounts provides a meaningful way to continue a much larger conversation regarding vulnerability, community, and the true cost of honesty.